I'm Latham Thomas, Flow Maven. I'm here with my friend Topeka, and we're going to talk about her journey. I'm so happy to welcome you here. Thank you, Topeka, for being here with me today.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored. Thank you for having me share all of the wonderful things that are us, Black women, but just having this conversation so people really understand what's happening around women, health equity, and women who are presently incarcerated.
Yes. The first question I kind of want to get into with you, you're the founder of this incredible organization. Can you share with us more in depth what Ladies of Hope Ministries is and what the core of your work really consists of? Like, what does your day-to-day really consist of?
Day to day, huh? Uh, like my day to day is no sleep. I'm up at 5 a.m. every single day. I pray, I meditate in the morning before I, get on my day. I am trying to get on my Peloton more regularly, but that is, because I travel so much, it doesn't happen the way I want to. But I'm usually in the office somewhere around 8 o'clock and just running an organization. We have 20 employees, almost 10 contractors or consultants, and the work for LOHM is epic. So we say
Mhm.
that our work is to end poverty and incarceration of women and girls. We look at doing that by two buckets. One is direct service and sustainability. The other one is advocacy and engagement. What we do know is that we cannot end incarceration unless we address the root issues of poverty and making sure that women have their basic human rights met, which are safe housing, food, and a job or entrepreneurship training or development. And so we have 6 programs. As I said, we have a core team of brilliant leaders who are passionate about this work, but who are all committed to making sure we are addressing poverty in order to end incarceration of women and girls.
Beautiful. And this is a really unique area to be in, right? And so I wonder, and for the people who don't know your story, can you tell us what brought you to this work? And if you don't mind sharing a little bit about your personal journey.
Sure. So what brought me to the work was my incarceration. I spent 3 years in federal prison for a drug conspiracy charge. And prior to going to prison, I mean, I grew up privileged, both my parents, until my father passed when, after 58 years of marriage. They were franchise business owners. We grew up in Long Island, in Manorville, which was a suburb in New York. Only Black family in our neighborhood. They were franchise business owners. I was captain of every team. I was president of every club. I was president of the Spanish club and didn't speak Spanish. Just goes to show just how ambitious I was. Also, I, was classically trained in piano, flute. So I had every single opportunity. And I decided I wanted to go to an HBCU because I wanted to be in a school where there were other kids that looked like me, Black kids to be specific. And so I chose Morgan State University because it was not too far from New York, but far enough, being around my parents and wanted to kind of get a little freedom, if you will. And like many kids, you get caught up. You look at and you find things that are very different than what you're used to. And so Baltimore City was completely different from suburbia. And I started dating guys that were selling drugs, eventually selling drugs myself while going to school, starting businesses. I was division chairperson for Amtrak for New York and DC, and this went on for many years. And then finally, I find myself arrested in Virginia on a federal drug conspiracy charge as a federal sting operation. So I was brought into what they call an ongoing investigation and basically set up. Now, was I guilty? Yes. Did I do or conspire to sell drugs? Yes. However, did I think that I was going to get a bail? Yes. I didn't have any type of violence in my past. And so when the judge said that I was a drug queenpin and a threat to society and no bail, I was completely taken aback. And so I found myself in a new community, which was very different than what I was similar or used to. And I began selfishly to go to NA and AA meetings because that was the only time I was able to get out of this cell that I was locked in for 21 to 23 hours a day. And as I began to hear the stories that women shared about their incarceration, and what led them there, and the fact that I thought that people use drugs because they wanted to, and I heard the stories where a sister said that her father had been raping her and he gave her heroin and told her to take the heroin and the pain would go away. And another sister said that the only time she was able to spend time with her mother was when they smoked crack together. And when I realized that the harm that I caused by even being engaged in this type of lifestyle, because in my particular situation, I didn't have to,
Right.
I decided to plead guilty because I was, and I went off to federal prison. And going to federal prison, it was much of the same. The difference was there were women who were doctors, lawyers, senators, judges, different levels of education. But it was the same underlying issues: sexual trauma and violence, mental health issues, really, physical domestic abuse, and traumas which were unhealed that led them to this trajectory of going in through prison. And so through that pain, the Ladies of Hope Ministries was birthed. And I came home in 2015 and just hit the ground running and learning based on the experiences that I had, the sisters that I left behind, and the experiences that they shared. God told me to do this, and I knew obedience is much greater than sacrifice. Um, from the things in the past that I had done, and I know the wrath of God, that I decided that I might want to be obedient this time around. And so I did, and here we are.
Wow, what a powerful testimony. So much love happening for you in the chat. It just, I had to just pause for a moment when you said that you were in confinement for 23 hours a day, 21 to 23 hours. That was a lot to just hear that that's what you went through.
No, absolutely. I was considered a federal detainee because my case was federal, and the feds had a contract with this county jail in Virginia, Pamunkey Regional Jail. And so they separated people who were federal from people who were in the county. And so I was in the cell for that period of time. And the only way I was able to get out is if I did programming. And so they had church programs, which I went to. They had NA and AA classes, which I went to, anything to get out the cell. You were able to
Right.
go out to take a shower, you would eat within the community there, and other things. Use the phone, and it was a limited period of time throughout the day. So maybe 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. Go outside to get fresh air if they decided they would allow you to do that. So it was incredibly difficult. The county jail was the most difficult time for me, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, throughout my incarceration.
Wow. Thank you, first of all, for just sharing that, and also for illustrating for us, what it's like. I think, a lot of people see, through television and movies and stuff, experiences, but we're going to get into, a lot more of what folks experience and what you're advocating for. But I think it's really important to lay bare, right, what the issues are, and how inhumane these situations are. And I hear you speaking as somebody who is nonviolent, and I'm listening to this type of treatment that you received. And then I'm in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the insurrection and all these people complaining about the incredible care that they're getting, in and many of them who are actually coming out of jail after what happened at the Capitol. And you just see the
Mhm.
disparity, right? In terms, like, these people are not a threat, they're not a flight risk, they can go home, right? But somebody who does not have a violent history, who got caught up, who, if you look at their entire background, it's totally incongruent with what occurred, but yet she has to be locked up for 23 hours. So I just, that there's so much power in your story. There's so much perseverance, right? And what you've been through. And that shows up obviously in your work and how fiercely you advocate for others. I know today we're celebrating International Women's Day. And you've
Mm-hmm.
been a champion for women who come home, not only helping them to get on their feet, but also providing career advancement opportunities. And you're sort of I really feel like you're like a beacon also for folks to see, like, you know what, I can do that. I can be that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that what your past has consisted of does not have to like predicate your future. And you're someone who really is, who embodies that, who speaks that, who lives that. Can you speak about the importance of fostering economic empowerment and how you're doing that within your community at Ladies of Hope Ministries, and then just beyond, how that shows up in your ministry, like your personal ministry?
No, absolutely. And I think that they're all connected, right? They're all intersectional, they're all connected. And often, people think that charity means poverty. Like charity, you do charitable work and that you're supposed to live a particular way, that it's supposed to be volunteer and that you're supposed to do the work for free. And so, I mentioned earlier that we're looking to end poverty and incarceration of women and girls. That's a huge feat. In order to do that, you have to be well resourced, right? Because we're combating so many different systems of racism, system of gender bias, sexism, xenophobia, like all of these different systems. And when I think about like my personal journey, I come from entrepreneurs, period. I have two Black parents, who built businesses and who showed us that you can have, economic freedom and equity and stability if you work hard and you do that. And so that has always been for me something that was underlying. Yes, I went to college and yes, that was the thing that I was supposed to do, but ultimately I knew that I would be an entrepreneur. I happen
Yeah.
to be a social entrepreneur, right? And for me, it is incredibly important for women. So often we're not paid uh, equal wages. We're not given equal opportunities. We are told as women, specifically women of color, that we should just be grateful that opportunities are given to us, as if we shouldn't be valued for the expertise that we bring into certain spaces. And so because of that, I take those experiences that I had as expertise and I quantify that, right? In the end, like I am working, I sacrifice hugely. And so because of that, I should be compensated accordingly. Like this is work and it's not charitable. And what I know, the God that I serve tells me that as long as I'm doing and being obedient and doing the things that God wants me to do, that I will be compensated 100 times fold. And so therefore, that means that faith without works is dead. I can be faithful, but if I'm not working toward those goals and I'm not really almost demanding, being valued for that work, then what happens is, right, I become misused, mistreated, oppressed, and consistently perpetuated this, again, now state violence that happens, and which, of course, more traumatic experiences and things that then we end up going through these cycles of abuse. And I decided that when I was released from prison, that I was not going to be in any situation that had me feeling oppressed, had me being mistreated, and had me being undervalued, whether that be in relationships, intimate or casual, whether that be even personal or business relationships. And so I show up in a way to not only inspire, but to help other sisters to aspire, right? Like we can have everything that we dare to dream. Those moments in our lives, those 3 years that I spent in prison, is a small piece of my entire life. It does not make up who I am. It does not define who I am. And it does not even put me on the path to where my trajectory is going. What it did was it informed me of what was happening in this country, specifically around women and girls. It informed me the gender biases and the racial biases that happen specifically to women of color. It allowed me to experience something that brought me with women, specifically other women that may have had other experiences that were different than mine. And it actually pushed me and encouraged me to continue to build things that help other women see their value and be valued so that they can continue to build their life and move forward. And so for me, that's what it's about. It's about creating equitable opportunities. It's about understanding, listen, I am working and this work needs to be valued. And as this work, we need to be able to raise money in order to hire the best talent, just like the for-profit business, because this is business. The prison industrial complex is a business. And in order to break that business and dismantle that business, it's going to take resources to do that.
That's right. Let the church say amen.
Yeah, I get on my soapbox and just keep
Yes. No, everybody's in here like, yes, 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 because absolutely. We are talking also, you know, with International Women's Day, a lot of people don't want to talk about the fact that, you know, many times when we're talking about folks who are keeping us away from opportunities, it is other women. You know, we need to talk about the fact that, you know, we'll walk into spaces where, you know, folks who should be valuing the work and supporting the work and amplifying and paying the wage that is asked for, the paying what, you know, someone requests for their worth. And you'll have people trying to bargain you down or cut you down or under, you know, value the work, who are also putting on social media like, hey, equal opportunity, equal pay. It's not just equal pay. When we're talking about men, we are talking about the fact that there are folks disproportionately that are in situations whereby in their own identity group, right, are being underpaid, right? And so it's so important for us to also interrogate that within this context of like women working with women. And it's important that folks understand too that when you're going out in the world, if you, like, nobody, by the way, is going to hand you anything if you do not stand in your power and your value around your worth, right? You will get exactly what it is that people decide they want to give you, right? And as you said, it's mostly undervalued because in general, in this country and in the West, we do not value women's work. We do not value work of the home. And we certainly do not value people who make mistakes. We don't have a redemption culture. We don't have a culture around forgiveness. And we certainly don't have a culture that even when you've paid your time and you paid your dues and your debt, quote unquote, to society, you come out and you still don't have opportunity. You are still carrying the weight of something that you did years ago, and nobody wants to put opportunity in front of you. And that's why I applaud your work so much, because it is about working beyond that trap. It is about, you know, envisioning something bigger. It is about creating something. It's not about trying to get a seat at the table. It's about building your own motherfucking table that's long enough for everybody. And so I love you for that. And I think it's so important and so critical, because people will have you out here thinking that if you can't get a job here or there or keep yourself out of trouble, then you have no value to society, you have no worth. And people can actually envision and dream for something that doesn't even exist. There's problems that they could solve, right? It's like, so going through programs and getting empowered and being able to tell your story, speaking, right? As, you know, going out on a speaking tour, you know, supporting other people through programs, educating youth. There's so many opportunities within your organization, but also what I love most importantly is the building back up of individuals, right? Like coming home and being poured into. That is so critical, and it's not happening in so many spaces. And so I just want to honor you for bringing that into the work, not just like, here's some skills. Let's pour love. Let's make sure you feel fortified, right? So that you can go out and actually lift your shoulders up and hold your head high, right? So I just applaud you for that. I thank you for this incredible work that you're doing, and also for you to step into your power in such a potent way, you know, like you said, this is not, you know, this is not the sum of who you are, but what I believe also is that this like really ignited for other people a torch. Yes. So you're in service, you know, obviously of God, you are in service as a torch that is light for others. And so thank you for that, Topeka.
I appreciate you so much. I just want to add before you move on real quick, there's a few things that you touched on that were really, really critical to this conversation. One is like, how do we treat each other as sisters? We talked about that when we went out, right? As Black women, how are we treating each other? And we don't understand that often that we are re-traumatizing each other based on our own traumas that we hold. And, you know, let's be clear that your trauma is not my heavy. Like, I can't at some point, you know, where I am today in my life, be able to continue to unpack your own trauma. That's something you need to deal with. And I remember specifically when I got to college that I was going through this identity crisis, which is what led me into incarceration. It was people telling me, "Oh, you're pretty to be dark skinned," or you talk like you're white, or it was all of these things. And I'm like, wait a minute, like I'm just me. And I'm trying at this point to now find a sense of connectedness and belonging, which is why I ended up going through the trajectory. And, I'm aware of the why, right? My lack of self-esteem, my lack of really understanding who I was and whose I was, as my mother says, and that I wanted to truly just be connected, right, in a way, and be accepted. And when I came home, I found myself doing the same thing, wanting to be accepted and wanting to be a part of a community. And when I was talking to a sister today, and I said, the irony is that we all are living and unpacking our trauma. Yes, historically, Black women have been completely traumatized, and we have been forced almost, right, to begin just to pick up and keep it moving without dealing with that. Thank God that today, there's a conversation around mental health issues and around healing, and why that's so important for us, because of what we need to do, not only for ourselves, but for our Black families and our Black communities. But in the end, what I've learned through this is that there is a healing journey, right, that each of us have to go through individually, and that it's unfair for us to impose our own traumas onto our sisters. And I'm going to specific to sisters because it's International Women's Day, right? That if you are wanting to learn how a sister has gone through her healing journey, then let's ask, right? Let's say, sis, I see you shining. How can I get where you are, right? How can you share those tools that you learned? Because this is an everyday practice that we have to go through in order to leave behind those things that were, once hindering us, in order to move forward. And so, I just wanted to say this because I've been having these conversations lately just around, yes, it is racism that is happening in this country. And there is a history of racism that has perpetuated internalized racism and colorism within our community. However, we can take hold of where we are today. We can pour love into one another, and we can begin to heal ourselves so that we can lead in that. And I just want us to lead with love. I want us to begin to heal ourselves so that we can begin to do the work in order to heal our communities. And the only way we can do that is if we check self. Like, check yourself, check your intentions, check what you're doing, find out why you're hating on the next sister when you don't even know her. Like, figure out what's happening, and really get to a place where we can move forward, so that next year, this time on International Women's Day, we can say collectively as women of color, how we've been able to bound together, right? Heal, use all of these restorative practices that we talk so fluently about from our past, and move forward. So I just wanted to touch on that, because we've talked about that, you and I think it's so critical when you brought it up in order to bring it to the forefront here in this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. People are so energized in here. So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit around reproductive health. And as you know, this is an area that's my home base, but it's also an area you have a lot of familiarity with and a personal experience. And so I know you've been very vocal about your experiences with reproductive health. I wanted to know if you could describe how your care was approached while you're incarcerated, and what you really learned about reproductive rights, but particularly through a lens if we're thinking about a lens of reproductive justice, right? Access, respectful care, obviously dignified care, where these gaps are and what you sort of witnessed.
So this gets me emotional every time. And I was incarcerated originally in 2012. And so we're looking at almost 10 years, right? Yeah, 9 years. And so, excuse me if I get a little choked up right now. I just want to kind of give everyone a heads up. So when I was incarcerated, originally arrested and detained with no bail, so not convicted yet, pled guilty and not guilty at this particular time. When I went in, I was already diagnosed with uterine fibroids. And anyone who understands, anything about fibroids, you have heavy cycles. Sometimes it's, a week. Sometimes it can be a month. Your flow changes. It can go through a pack of pads, sometimes a day. And so when I got in, I had these issues, and they only gave out like 5 pads at this particular prison I was in for your cycle. And so when I let the doctor know what was happening with me, every single time, mind you, again, I preference this with, I was not convicted at this particular time. Um, I was sent out to go to the doctors. I was handcuffed and shackled. I was black box, which means that they put a box on your hand so you can't move, tied around your waist with a chain and your ankles. And I was put in a black and white suit. So if you remember years ago from the chain game, it was this black and white jumpsuit, a striped jumpsuit. When they would take me out, they would stop in the middle of the parking lot of the hospital, and they would walk me through this in these handcuff shackles in a black box, right? To completely humiliate me. They would handcuff me to the side of the bed whenever I would get a checkup. They would have a guard in the room, a correction officer who had to be there. Sometimes it was men, sometimes it was women. So just imagine having to open up your hoo-ha in front of, it didn't matter whoever, a stranger, whether it was a man or woman who was in the room while you're getting a checkup. So that was the first point of me like, wait a minute, I haven't even been found guilty, and yet I'm being treated this way, right? And so, you think about in the jails, you don't get paid much for a job if you can get a job. 5 cents an hour, 40 cents an hour, sometimes, or 40 cents an hour, sometimes $1 a day, if that. Yet they sell pads on commissary for which you could buy a pack of pads from in the store. But yet they're very thin. They're never, a decent pad, and they didn't sell tampons at all because they said that tampons would be used to perform sexual acts. This is the way that they looked at us, and they thought that every time we would want to use something, it would be done for something else. So nonetheless, I remember the first surgery that they said that I had. It was a laparoscopic myomectomy. So they, went in through my stomach, laser. I came back, and I felt like nothing changed. And even to this day, I'm still waiting on my medical records from that. They did not release them to me. I told the doctor, like, something is wrong. I don't feel like nothing changed. They said, oh, we have the medical records. They removed the tumor. I go to federal prison at this point, and I was treated the same. Now they're telling me when I go to the doctor that there's nothing wrong. I don't have fibroids. So they do a uterine biopsy, telling me they have to do all of these different tests in order for them to see what's there. They tell me they do the uterine biopsy and I don't have anything, and I should now get a hysterectomy, because if I want the bleeding to stop, that I should get a hysterectomy. And this is when you hear so often they talk about forced sterilization of women who are incarcerated when they find out later that there were no problems. They then told me, because I wanted to get some overnight pads or something that was, a better quality, because I could afford, because I had support from the outside. I worked, one of the number one jobs, if you could, it was $100 a month at the prison. I could afford to purchase, but you could only purchase a pack of pads a week. And so, I'm sorry, yeah, on commissary a week. And sometimes I would go through a pack of pads a day. This is how bad it was. And so they tell me I need to quantify my cycle. So that was, I needed to take the used pads, put them in a brown paper bag, take it to the guard, open the bag. The guard would have to look in the bag and see that I actually used the pads and they were soiled, in order to give me 5 more pads. And this would go on sometimes several times a day, several times a week for sure. And the humiliation, the lack of dignity, and the way this made me feel, understanding that I was resourced well enough that I could purchase, but for all the sisters that couldn't, I was just completely heartbroken for them. Also, when we were in the county jail, and I've been talking about this recently, that they did what was called dumpster diving. And so when you're arrested with what you have on your back. And that includes, if you wear panties, the panties that you have on. And so you're there with one pair of panties. If you want more panties, in many prisons across the country, you have to purchase them. They do not issue panties. And so what happens is that, again, I'm grateful to God that I was able to purchase a pack of panties, which was 3 for about $10. However, women would have to do what they call dumpster diving. And what that was there was a huge bin that there was used and recycled panties for God knows how long those panties had been there. And women would have to actually go in and find a pair of panties that was less soiled in order for them to be able to have a pair of panties outside of the ones that they may have come in with. And for me, if you send something away in laundry, you wouldn't get it back. And so I was forced to actually have to wash my panties out by hand in my toilet. And I would have to rinse using the little button for the spin cycle. And, you know, when I was talking about this on a panel at Johns Hopkins University the other day, and there were two other sisters, shout out to Charlotte and Dr. Zaria Davis, and they talked about similar experiences. You know, I think about just the resilience and the courage and the power that women go through who have lived this particular experience and then having to continually relive this trauma just to get people to understand that we deserve to be treated like humans, right? Like, who wants to go and get a pair of panties that likely have been in there 5 years and have been through however many asses it's been through, you know, whatever, in order to find something that's less soiled? Who treats people like that, right? These prisons in this country do. And so through those experiences that I saw and what I personally went through, when I came home, and women, all formerly incarcerated women who had lived the same experience, we came together and was like, we have to change this. And so Dignity for Incarcerated Women originally, which was a federal bill that was co-sponsored by Senator Booker, Senator Warren, and Senator Harris at the time, was to make sure that women had personal hygiene products at no cost to them, to make sure that we were ending shackling of women during child labor, because that happens in this country still today. To make sure that families are consistently connected and reunified. So that way we're not having a sister who's from New York who's being shipped to California and there's no way her kids can be connected or get to her. And so through that, I began to work as a dignity director with Cut 50, which is now Dream Court Justice, where we partnered and began to get women who were formerly incarcerated around the country to lead efforts within their state to pass over 15 bills that made sure that women had their dignity restored, and making sure that, you know, we were doing that. And so what is so great is that we were able to take those painful moments of our lived experience to push and pass legislation, which is why, to your point, storytelling is so critical and important. And that we were valued, right? Like, this wasn't just work that we were doing for free, that we were compensated for our work, that we were looked at as the experts, that we were testifying at Congress, that we were drafting and writing this legislation from our experience. And we were supported in that way because we were valued. And through that, it was just, and it's still happening. Like, we passed these bills, but in Florida, there has been women who are still shackled, right? Like, they're still being shackled, though we have the legislation that was passed. They're still doing it. And so, you know, you pass a legislation, then there's a culture shift that you have to change with the staff, right, to enforce this legislation. And then it's culture around just the community to understand that these things are happening. And so it's like, it's so much work, but it is work that is so well rewarding for me, because though every time I have these conversations, I have to unpack, I have to take a sip of Juicy Lucy, and I have to do these things because it is so hurtful. The experiences that we've lived, formerly incarcerated and impacted women have gone through these experiences. And I think that it's critical that we continue to raise and lift this profile about what's happening in this country.
Yes. Wow. Topeka, first of all, I mean, the visual on that storytelling, the visual of the storytelling, the visual of people sorting through a dumpster to find underwear. I mean, the visual of you having to move through a parking lot to go into a hospital to get care, to basically not have your basic needs met. We're talking about basic human needs, right? We're not talking about like, oh, I've asked for, I mean, anything out of, you know, anything extraordinary. I'm asking for underwear, which I need. I'm asking for
Right.
pants, which I need. to be, and also to get 5 freaking pads for a cycle, like wild. So just again, folks, if you're listening, just to understand, right, that we think about like where indignities lie and where inhumanity lies, and what oppression looks like in the world that we live in around us, and we have no idea, many of us, what is happening inside the spaces to folks who have been incarcerated. So thank you for that story. It's gutting and so just like painful. But what I hope folks connect with here is that there's something that we can do, right? There are organizations that we can support. There is legislation we can support. And I would love to kind of talk, you sort of touched on this a little bit already around legislative efforts that you're proud of, and health equity and why you're passionate about it. You've also been just like a force for change in bringing awareness to the stories of other incarcerated women and pleading the cases, for people. And so, for instance, folks like Alice Johnson and others, right, that folks didn't know about. And then you did some, you made videos and put together packages, information to sort of push out to the world to help other people. And so, can you tell us more about this work and the importance of this movement towards more awareness, really, of the stories, because what I feel like it's connecting to is not like what got somebody there, but like who they are, right? Like who they are in totality. And that feels like what you've been doing with the storytelling is sharing like the whole of who this person is, for people to find their entry point with compassion and also to take them into action. So I would love for you to describe to us more about like how you do this, what it looks like to sort of build a campaign around, someone's freedom, what that could look like, or commuting of a sentence, or even pardoning, what all that kind of looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there is the federal system, which is what I was a part of, and then there's the state and county jails. And with the county and jails, there's more people who are presently in state prisons than there are in the federal prison. But it's all necessary. When we look to pass legislation on the federal level, it's in hopes that we're able to get it replicated on the state level. And so when I'm looking at the stories of women who I was incarcerated with, and women that I've been able, thank God, to uplift and be connected through through women that I was actually incarcerated with, and they were like, hey, Topeka, when you get home, you need to find Michelle West. You need to find Alice Johnson. You need to find, Bernetta Willis. You need to find Ramona Brand. God bless her. You have to find these sisters and you have to help them because you're coming home. That's what I did. And I met Amy Pova, who has Can Do Clemency, a sister who received clemency herself through President Bill Clinton. And she fought for, Can Do stands for a clemency for all nonviolent drug offenders. And so she had a list, a top 25 list. And when I saw that list, and I saw Miss Alice was number 1 at the time, I was moved by her story. And when I was inside, I was like, wow, if people saw the faces of women who are presently incarcerated, this would change. There's no way. I had been incarcerated with women who were mothers, who were daughters, who were grandmothers, who were aunties, who were just sisters. And there's no way they should have been in here. Like, I'm a firm believer that there are alternatives to incarceration. And there are other ways to hold people accountable while healing and making communities whole again. And prisons do not do that. And so as I began to use technology, because I often make a little joke and say, when I went in, that there was an iPhone 3 and I came out and it was an iPhone 5. So much didn't change for me as it related to technology. So often there are women who may have gone in when there was no iPhone and there was no internet, no Microsoft, and they had to learn everything. But what we know is technology changes things. And so for me, it was, how do I get these stories out? How do I create platforms for people to use their voice? I am not a voice for the voiceless. I do not like when people use that term.
Me either.
Because there's nothing that I can share. I can share somebody's experience, like the sister who I met who was pregnant. I can share what I saw, but it's nothing like someone talking about their lived experience and what they went through. Someone can tell you about the fact that women need pads and tampons while they're in prison. But because I was able to experience that myself, because I was able to look at women dumpster diving, I can talk about that in a way that's going to move people in a very different way than someone who's never seen it. And
Yeah.
so often what we see in these stories, and yes, men are incarcerated, men of color are incarcerated at a huge rate. The problem is, in my opinion, that for every man that is incarcerated, we forget about the mother, daughter, grandmother, sister, aunt, girlfriend, baby mother who's also incarcerated with that brother who's inside as well. And so when we look at the numbers of women who are incarcerated, not only is a 750% increase over the last few decades, not only are women being sentenced to life double the rate of men for the same charges today, not only are women being sentenced and when men are going home because of cooperation and other things, we're not looking at women. And these stories, these movies, which are great and which are elevating the situations that are happening, they are not centered around women. And so for me, I unapologetically advocate on behalf of women and girls. I create opportunities and platforms so women can tell their stories and use their voice, which is how that happened with Alice. There was Mike.com came to an event that we did at Google and approached me through Michael Skolnick, who was like, listen, Mike.com wants to do this video, can you help facilitate that? I was able to because I had permission through the prison to be able to do these things. Alice wanted to do it. We did it. It went viral. Kim Kardashian saw it. She acted based on what she saw, went into the White House, used her privilege and her connections, and Alice is home. And Alice has been a champion since she's been home. She's been able to get hundreds of people home based on her advocacy work and help in order to get me a pardon. I didn't even apply. And I got a pardon based on her leadership, Daniel Loeb and many others, Jessica Jackson and others who are in the space. And so I think that, when you look at really, for me, it's the leadership of those with lived experience, whether it is incarceration, whether it is domestic violence, whether it is rape and abuse, whether it is pregnancy while incarcerated or birthing doulas through helping women of color specifically in our communities with that it is people who are directly affected and live that experience that should be at the helm of helping to share those stories, tell those stories, and be compensated for those stories. And so we created one of our 6 programs is the Faces of Women in Prison program, which focuses on training women how to use their voice but also get compensated for their work as public speakers. My first year really public speaking, I came home and I was like, oh, I just want to talk and I want to tell everybody everything. And I'm doing it for free. They might pay for my flight, pay for the hotel, and I'm super pumped because I'm like, some of these, they doing this and I'm getting to be places. Until I found out that the person next to me was getting a check. And I was like, wait a minute, something isn't right here. Because I know when I get off, people are crying and want to know how they can help. And all you're doing is sitting there. So we got to do something different. And as I began to understand the language, like what is an honorarium and what is the speaker's fee? And I began to say, wait a minute, okay, how do I quantify my value? Because I'm adding to this conversation, if not the conversation, that I looked up and the next year, the first year I did it, it was like 50,000 in additional income. And then next time I look up, then it's like over 6 figures. And I'm like, wait a minute. If I can do this, then I need to train other women how to do it too, right? How can they do it so they can actually not only be able to be valued for the pain that they're sharing, right? Like we don't need to just share this pain and not be compensated for it, but also how can they do something that'll have them be able to also be home with their children, be able to keep their families reunified, be able to feel good about the work that they're doing. And so we've been able to train, it was 11 women in the first cohort. Now we're on to 20 women in the second cohort. We partner with the NFL to do a cohort that is focusing specifically on women who are subjected to police violence and gun violence and what has happened there. We've also partnered with GTL to help to show an intersection between women who are veterans and incarceration and what that looks like. And we're getting a lot of support. Foundation Chanel supports us. Arnold Ventures, our For Justice for Foundation on this specific project. And it's because people understand, like, if to your point earlier, like if we're not invited into the room, we have to create our own, right? We create our own space, our own tables, our own. And in order to create those, we have to also, be very vocal on what we deserve. And so for me, it was really just trying to guide sisters on understanding. Listen, if you're willing to talk for free, people will have you all day. Like sometimes you have to say, I'm sorry, this is not going to work because you're taking time out. You're having to find childcare, adult care for your family, bills that need to be paid, and you cannot take your time providing, these your expertise and not get compensated. So that's where the equity comes in for me. And across all of our programs, it's about teaching women how to be valued, how to demand that value. And I'm beginning to see where people are really understanding that, and that's important. And so I'm happy that I'm noticing in our space that it is changing.
Beautiful, because it's important. And I'm so thankful that you're at the helm really preaching this and making sure people understand that not just in some spaces folks get paid, all of us get paid, right? I would like to ask you though, in this time, where so much of your work is community driven, so much of it is high touch, it's touching people, it's being in contact and connected, and obviously utilizing the social tools that we have, and like you said, the technology to sort of advance people in general. But thinking about like this time that we've lived through this past year, how have you stayed connected and fortified through community without being able to be as in depth and as hands-on in community?
When you do this type of work, it's no days off. I don't have the luxury of sitting home. Yes, we do panels now on Zoom and IG and all these other things, which are great because it allows us to have a larger reach, right? But I still have the day-to-day work. I still have a staff of incredible leaders that I have to work with. I still have funds that I have to raise as a nonprofit organization in order for us to keep that lights on in the house we have in the Bronx and the lights on in the house that we have in New Orleans. I have to be in these places where I'm always looking to see where there are opportunities, where there's a lack of resources for women in states like Florida, in Maryland, in Philadelphia, in New Jersey, and how am I connecting with other sisters in Trinidad and Tobago? Like, how are we connecting with sisters from around the globe that want to do the work, where we can partner and get those resources to them in order for this to change? And so for me, it's by any means necessary. Like, they have this language, I'm an essential worker. And so, that is true. I am an essential worker. I'm working to end poverty and incarceration of women and girls in my community. And so because of that, I got to get it how I get it. Because at the end of the day, women, as I said earlier, are the fastest growing segment going into prisons and jail. Women also, even during COVID, are not being released at the rate of men are being released. Women, when they come home, they are looking for their children. They're looking for housing. They're looking for access. They're looking for jobs. They're looking for safety. And for me, I cannot, with the privilege that I've had, just being able to be connected to incredible people like you and organizations, to have these great opportunities to share these experiences, I can't stop. And so, with those sacrifices, we just do what we do. You know about it. We find ways. We find ways to connect. We find ways to elevate the message. We find ways to connect with our sisters, and we find ways to keep it moving. And
Yeah.
so that's what I do. I just keep it moving. I am learning some balance so that I can spend time with my mama, you know. But people don't understand the sacrifices that we have to make in order to really share the things that we've learned with the masses. And so I'm grateful. Shout out to Sally Davis, who's also our senior advisor, and everybody at LOHM who, give me the space to be great, because, if it wasn't for them holding down the fort every single day, I wouldn't be able to do all the things that I'm great at, because without them, there is no us.
Right. And thank you for offering up that, support is so critical, right? For visioning, for wisdom keeping, for queendom building, and for what you're creating. Like you said, for you to be great, you need support around you. And so I'm thankful that you brought that into this space on this International Women's Day, for us to be thinking about also how can we build support around ourselves, how we can think about what team leadership looks like. What does it look like to have more support? And how do you build support? And by the way, there are ways to like fortify your community for support, right? So we're not just talking about you hiring staff, but you enlisting folks that are part of your community into your vision, right? What does that look like to be lifted while you're doing the work that you're doing that's so important? Everyone who's here. Thank you so much, Topeka, for that, and just for everything that you've shared today, which has been so potent and beautiful. Thank you all so much for being here. And Topeka, I love you.
I love you.